And our text comes from Isaiah chapter 51, verses 1 through 6. Isaiah writes, "Listen to me, you that pursue righteousness, you that seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you. For he was but one when I called him, but I blessed him and made him many. For the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places, and will make her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the voice of song. Listen to me, my people, and give heed to me, my nation. For a teaching will go out from me, and my justice for a light to the peoples. I will bring near my deliverance swiftly. My salvation has gone out, and my arms will rule the peoples. The coastlands wait for me, and for my arm they hope. Lift up your eyes to the heavens, and look to the earth beneath. For the heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, and those who live on it will die like gnats. But my salvation will be forever, and my deliverance will never be ended." Here ends our reading for this morning. Abraham and Sarah, beyond our imagination. Story. Bill's 84-year-old mother insisted on living by herself, maintaining her strict independence. Her 4 children lived in the same town, but she rarely called them except in an emergency. So when Bill got a call one day to come over to the house, he had great apprehensions. When he arrived, she said she had suspected that there was a burglar in her bedroom closet the night before. And Bill said, "Then why didn't you call me last night?" And she said, "Well, it was late, and I hated to bother you. So I just nailed the closet door shut and went to bed." Now that's a story of faith. Nailing shut the door of doubt and leaving the rest to God. That's the kind of faith the Bible tells us that Abraham and Sarah had. Do you know what the most common phrase in the Bible is? It's 4 little words. Do not be afraid. That phrase appears 365 times in the Bible. 1 time for every day of the year. Do not be afraid. That's what the Bible tells us. Why? Because God is with us, and with God, nothing is impossible. God often gives us a way where there appears to be no other way. Today we continue God's story as we look at Abraham and Sarah. And their story can be summed up in one word: faith. So here's a couple acronyms for the word faith. Full assurance in trusting Him. Or fear ain't in this house. That's my favorite. Or fantastic adventure in trusting Him. That describes Abraham and Sarah's story. It was by faith that Abraham and Sarah lived their lives. And what an adventure it was. I want to share 4 key elements of their faith moments in their life. First was their name change. Abraham was originally called Abram. The name Abram means exalted father, which is kind of strange because most of his life Abraham was fatherless. His name was changed to Abraham when God promised to make him the father of a multitude of nations, thereby putting the Ha in Abram, Abraham. Sarah's name was Sarai. Sarai means palace or home. Sarah means princess. Changing their names reflected the new life and the new calling they received from God. Abraham, the father of many nations, and Sarah, a princess. They go together. How appropriate. When I was planning to leave Bedford, my name was changed from Robbie to Rob. It was natural change in my mind to reflect the new life as an adult when I left my hometown of Bedford. Oddly enough, people in Bedford still call me Robbie. I received our 30th anniversary for high school graduation reunion that's coming up this year, and it was addressed to Robbie Miller. A name change is significant, especially for someone who answers God's call like Abraham and Sarah. Second key moment of faith. God said to them, go, and they went. Genesis 12. Abraham and Sarah were living with his family in the city of Ur in Babylon. God spoke to Abraham one day saying, hey, Abraham, leave your country, leave your relatives, leave your families, and go to the land that I will show you. Can you imagine? Abraham is 75 years old when this call comes for him to leave his family and security and safety and head out to an unknown place. It took faith to do what he did. But even more so for Sarah, because Sarah, all she knew was polytheism and idolatry. She had no concept of this God that spoke to Abraham. What would you do? What would you do if your husband or your wife came home and you said, hey, honey, how was your day? And he or she says to you, well, God spoke to me today, and he wants us to pack up all our stuff and hit the road. You might respond with, what? You got to be kidding me. Where are we going? I don't know, your spouse shrugs. God said he'll show us as we go. Yeah, right. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? And it did sound crazy to Sarah and to Abraham. To pack up everything, to head out to an unknown, undeveloped place. God says, leave everything that's familiar to you. Leave your old values, your old priorities, your old identities. Leave all your old gods. Leave it all behind. I'm sending you to be a blessing to others. And they went. That's faith. Do you trust God like that? Is God asking you to leave anything behind? Any idol? Any sin? Any behavior that you know God doesn't approve of? Any habits? Is God asking you to leave behind anything? Perhaps to take on some new ministry item. Some new adventure in your life. Some new job. Something. Is God calling you to go and be a blessing to someone else in a radical way? Just think how life would be so different if Abraham and Sarah stayed in their safe and comfortable place. Third key moment of faith for Abraham and Sarah. God told Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but there was one little problem. He didn't have any children. Oh. He's in his 80s. Sarah, his beautiful wife, is in her 70s. Do you see the problem? The Bible said she is barren, which in those days interpreted as she was cursed in some way. So Sarah comes up with a plan. It's a good plan. She decides she's going to have her husband Abraham sleep with her slave girl Hagar and conceive a child through her. He does, she does, but that was not part of God's plan. And it didn't go the way Sarah had thought it might go. This lack of patience on her part led to thousands of years of fighting and feuding between the descendants of Ishmael, Arabs, and Isaac, the Israelis. Hagar gives birth to Ishmael when Abraham is 86 years old. This was not part of God's plan. This is another example of humans thinking our ways are better than God's ways. Ever do that? Ever think your plan is better than the plan that God has for you because God's plan is so crazy, so far out there, it can't be possible? God comes back to Abraham and reminds him of the original plan. When Abraham is 99, yes, 99, and Sarah is 89, yes, 89, never think that God is done with you no matter how old you happen to be. Here's a great story. God says, you will be the father of many nations, and you will have a son by Sarah, your wife, and you will be my people, and I'll be your God. Just imagine being Abraham and hearing that. Yeah, right. We often, by the way, say that in our house when we think or hear of something that's unbelievable. Yeah, right. So God says there's going to be a sign. I love this part of the story. Hey, there's going to be a sign of this covenant, my promise to you, Abraham. And Abraham says, yeah, what's the sign? God says, here's the sign. I want you and your whole household to be circumcised. Imagine Abraham hearing that. Imagine him standing there scratching his head and reconsidering this whole plan of God's. I mean, think about it. Noah's sign was a rainbow. Huh? And Abraham's sign is circumcision. Can you hear him explaining that one to Sarah? He comes home and Sarah says, so how was your day? And he says, well, you know what? God spoke to me again today. Oh yeah, what did he say? Well, he's given me a sign of the covenant we share. Yeah? What sign? Well, he wants me to be circumcised. He wants you to do what? Well, it's where you cut off. I know what circumcision is. Why? Well, I guess God wants us to cut off anything in our lives that gets in the way of an intimate relationship with God. Oh. Of course, the Bible doesn't tell us if they had a conversation like that. It simply tells us that Abraham obeyed God that very day. Wow. Abraham and Sarah were not perfect. Their faith was not perfect. They both laughed at God's promise when he said, I will make you a great nation. And next year, this time when I return, Sarah will have a baby. He's 99, she's 89. They both laugh. Abraham falls on the ground laughing. Sarah's in the tent and overhears this. She laughs. God comes to Sarah, or to Abraham, and says, why does Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? And then when Sarah is confronted about laughing, she goes, I didn't laugh. And God says, oh, yes, you did. Wouldn't you laugh? Abraham and Sarah have their doubts. Who wouldn't? They wonder, how can this be? Yet they hold on to God's promise. A year later, a son is born. God tells them to name the child Isaac, which means he laughs. Now, God has a great sense of humor. Can you picture everyone laughing in this story because a child is born in the geriatrics ward and Medicare has picked up the bill? Everyone laughs because Sarah is the only one who goes to Dutchway to pick up Pampers and Depends at the same time. Everyone laughs because Sarah is buying strained vegetables for the whole family because nobody has any teeth. Picture her standing there in the checkout line holding this beautiful baby. And somebody standing there says, "Oh, what a beautiful baby. Is that your grandchild or great-grandchild?" And she says, "No, it's mine." And the person says, "Betty, get over here. You're not going to believe this old woman thinks this baby's hers." I mean, this is a funny story. Everyone who hears this story laughs. So God says, name the child, he laughs. In the midst of this story, though, there's this little line that I don't want you to miss. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That's a key question when it comes to living the faith. We too are children of Abraham. And we need to ponder that question here this morning. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That brings us to our fourth key element of faith. One day, Abraham's there watching his son Isaac playing. And can you picture him? Abraham's wondering, I wonder if I'll live long enough to see grandchildren. Isaac, by the way, let's say he's around 15 years of age, just about getting to that point where he's ready to start a family. Abraham's got to be 115. And God comes to him and says, "Abraham, I've got another little job for you." Abraham says, "Yes, what is it?" And God says, "I want you to sacrifice your son Isaac. I know I made a promise to you. You'll be the father of many nations, but here's what I want you to do. Sacrifice him." Can you imagine? Can you imagine the faith that it took for Abraham to gather up the wood, put it on his son, go out and put the wood, put his son on top of that wood, and get ready to sacrifice him? The kind of faith it took. And just before he does the deed, God intervenes, sends an angel. And there in the thicket is a ram. And God says, "Sacrifice that lamb instead of your son." And he does. And the sacrificial lamb begins in earnest as part of worship. Years later, many, many, many years later, another father, another son, is sacrificed for the sacrifices of all. His name is Jesus. He is placed on the wood as a sacrificial lamb. And doing so, he conquered death. I mean, he conquered death so that nothing will separate us from what's possible with God. Now, we can be a living sacrifice to God, living our lives by faith because of what Jesus has done for us. Do you have doubts? Do you ever wonder about this faith stuff? Do you ever wonder about God's plan for your life? Abraham and Sarah sure did. And their faith grew every day. They lived into the promises of life that God made for them. Their story reminds us that nothing is impossible with God. God is in the business of making a way when there seems to be no way. And that way is often beyond our imagination. And yet it's true. Nothing is too difficult for God. Amen.